and that I think we will see only in Strasbourg when we have the plenary sessions. But I also see from the beginning that a lot of MEPs from all big groups, from all, not the Eurosceptical, but let's say the progressive groups are active in my commissions. I already see that in all the main groups I will be able to work with most of them. Of course, we don't agree all the time, but a particularity at the European Parliament compared to national parliaments is that we have to work together to find agreements, to reach agreements, because we need to go to a common European Parliament position and then to go to negotiate with the European Commission and the European Council to make legislation go further and to approve the legislation. So this is really particular because we have always to make compromises and to negotiate together. And of course, then you work with active MEPs. And what is really shocking, what shocked me, the first plenary session, so the inaugural session of the European Parliament, that the Brexiters so tourner le dos, turn the back to the assembly. There were also, you know, like bad children making noise at the end of the class. And also the far right is almost, let's say, 1/3 of the plenary session. So it's quite shocking for someone that tries to fight extremists. So I think it's really important to say that all the other groups work together and that we can get majorities to improve the European legislation.
Yes, and I think you touch upon something that's quite key in the process of EU decision-making. It's the word compromise. It's really all about how you compromise indeed with the other institutions, if you take the Commission or the Council, but also the different political groups. But another question would be, compared to other parliaments, national parliaments, do you think the European Parliament has a strong voice and a strong say in the decision-making? I mean, if you look at the position of MEPs and their ability to present amendments and really change legislative texts?
Yes and no. Yes, there is a real influence of the European Parliament on policy making, but it should be stronger. And it's not because I'm a MEP, it's because I think in a real democratic system, you have a strong parliament with a initiative power, and then the executive power has to take into account the proposals coming from the parliament. And this is not the way it works at the European level, because in several matters, the European Parliament doesn't have the power to initiate legislation. It has to come from the European Commission. And then you have those go and returns between the Commission, the European Parliament, and at the end, the Council needs to approve. And very often, when you hear Europe blocked, the European Union didn't agree, it's not always, and in general, it's not the European Parliament that blocks. European Parliament reached an agreement. It's not necessarily the Commission with who we also reached an agreement. It's most of the time the Council, so the member states that block, because the member states gather together, 27 countries, and they block the system because they don't agree to go further. That's why I think the European Parliament has to get stronger power, because then it would also take less time to go through. I have an example. It's all the migration pact. The European Parliament reached a strong agreement also on the issue to have a share, a solidarity between the member states, and it's the member states themselves that blocked this migration pact. So now we're pushing to reactivate this pact and to have a strong dialogue with the Council. But still, you know that some countries, with Malta, France, decided to to work together, so that the willing countries work together to share, to have stronger solidarity to welcome migrants. But we want all of the member states to work together and to go to more solidarity.
Indeed, that's one of the key challenges in the EU, and well, maybe taking back a look at the European Parliament, you mentioned that indeed there was a breakthrough of the extreme right, but it wasn't as strong as the Green Wave, as some call it, as the Greens became the fourth political group at the European Parliament, with I think 70 seats for your political group. So it was a great success for the Greens. My question is, well, do you think it can really change the game for the European Parliament, and how can you really use this political power at the service of your ideas?
Yes, so we doubled our seats. Not, unfortunately, in every country we have representation so far, but still we doubled our representation in the European Parliament. And at the very beginning of the session, so in May, we started negotiations with the three main groups, so SND, Social and Democrats, the Renew, the Liberals, and the EPP, the Conservatives, to have a common program that we would deliver to the European Commission as a roadmap for the 5 years. That was the ambition, the initial ambition of the European Parliament. Until the Council, the Member States, decided to appoint the President of the European Commission, and then it became more a game of seats and of powers instead of first determining a program and then the casting. And at that time, the Greens were ejected from the negotiations, and again, the three main groups decided to have their share of seats in the European Commission. For me, it's a very bad signal, because what we wanted to obtain is a common roadmap, a progressive roadmap, also to have kind of a majority backing the action of the Commission, because yes, the brown wave didn't happen that badly as we expected it to be, but still, extreme right and conservatives together, it's almost 1/3 of the assembly, which is really important. So now the Greens, our position is to say, okay, you didn't want us, we have no green commissioner, so ideologically we're not on the same line as the commission of Ursula von der Leyen, but still, where you have progressive views, where we can work together, we will work together and work hand in hand with the different commissioners. So we managed to go through several files. It's never enough, but we're not. We just have 70 seats on 750, so it's still not enough. But still, in the previous mandate, for instance, we obtained quite a lot of good things on whistleblower directive, for example. Our group was very active, and we really managed to have a strong position on the protection of whistleblowers. So that's an action that we can put on the green victories. Another topic was the migration pact. If we managed to have quite a progressive, not progressive enough in our point of view, but still something equilibrate at the end of the negotiations with in the European Parliament on migration. It's also because of the action, thanks to the action of the Greens. Here we have other files we really want to work on, is for instance the, how do you say that in English? Obsolescence programmée. So the guarantee we want to put on products to protect consumers, actually, and so that constructors are not allowed anymore to predetermine when a product will be out of use.
Obsolete.
Obsolete. Thank you. And so several files, we know that if we don't push as Greens these topics at the European level, nobody will work on it. Also the PAC reform, so the agricultural reform, we know that the main line of at the European level, even in the European Parliament, is still to have this first pillar and the subsidies for intensive and industrial agriculture. But we pushed very strongly for a reform of the organic sector and organic agriculture. And again, if we hadn't been there to push this, there would be no European policy on organic farming.
So it really shows how the Greens as a political party can indeed make a difference on a directive or a regulation per regulation level. And you mentioned indeed that the green wave that was so talked about was not necessarily the same in all countries. For example, in Eastern European countries, it wasn't as big as, say, Germany or Belgium. But indeed, Belgium, so where you're from, where you were elected, has had a wave, a green wave that was already present at the last local election, so last year, and also to some extent in the federal elections. So, well, if you take it both on national and European level, is this trend of this green wave something that you think will sustain, or how does your political party want to really capitalize on it?
Well, what we saw is that the message we carry since 30 years has come to a point where also civil society and young leaders, let's qualify them like that, because they're opinion leaders, try to alert the rest of the political class to act, because we've reached a point where action is needed now and urgently. But unfortunately, what I see is that the other political groups haven't measured the emergency we're in. When it comes, for instance, to trade, the future Commissioner on Trade, Mr. Hogan, he will pursue the policy business as usual when it comes to international trade. So all the mobilization against TTIP or the CETA and now the Mercosur, the free trade agreement with countries of Latin America, is absolutely not taken into account. Mr. Hogan, during his hearing, said his main objective when it comes to Mercosur is to get it ratified. He didn't talk about the fires. He didn't talk about Amazonia. So all this climate change dimension of trade will unfortunately not be taken enough into account by the Commission. And again, in agriculture, it's the same, because the potential future commissioner, although he didn't succeed in his hearing, so he has to come back to the European Parliament Commission in charge. So he has a second hearing in a couple of days. Still, the path will be the same and will maintain this first pillar and second pillar, which will not compensate the industrial way of growing and farming. Although it's very important to go to another model if we really want to impact and have a change in our CO2 emissions and fight climate change. So I don't want to put a bad mood in the room, but still the Commission, as it comes, will not be revolutionary when it comes to fighting climate change. Although Ursula von der Leyen decided to go beyond the Paris objectives when it comes to reduction of CO2 emissions. But our question is, how will you succeed to obtain these goals if you don't put in place the policies to realize them?
Indeed, there's yes, we have a question in the audience. Sure.
Mr. Hogan, which is the commissioner designate for the trade policy. Because he strongly believes that the Mercosur will bring growth in the European Union, and that it's good for our industry to have a free trade agreement with the Latin American countries. It has been negotiated for 20 years by the European Commission. The European Commission finalized the negotiations in July. And so there's an agreement in principle between the European Union and the Mercosur countries. And now the objective of the new Commission, of Ursula von der Leyen and her trade commissioner, is to get it ratified, because they've reached an agreement, so the Commission's job is done. And so it would be a failure if they don't get it ratified. So now it's the European Parliament's job and the national parliaments to ratify the agreement. So the fight is not over, because I think that a lot of people, even outside the Greens, so in the other groups, it's not the fight is not lost yet. We can find a majority that could block the Mercosur for several reasons, and also Bolsonaro's policies, the situation of Amazonia and of indigenous people. I think the awareness is rising about problematic issue, and or farmers or the European farmers also mobilizing against the Mercosur, because they realize that more imports of low-cost beef, low-cost because the charges are not the same, the norms are not the same, the standards are not the same, will impact them negatively. So the beef sector, but also the chicken sector in the European Union really is really mobilizing against this agreement. It's a good agreement for the German automobile sector, also a good agreement for the Belgian chemical sector, because the barriers are lowered when it comes to export of products in those countries. So some sectors are happy, some others are not. So I really think here that the civil society mobilization can change the position at the European level, and also lobby our national parliaments to stand against this agreement.
But talking about civil society action, this year has been of a tremendous mobilization, especially from the youth. We had the movement Youth for Climate that actually emerged and was created by two young Belgian students, so Hanouna de Wever, that we mentioned in the introduction, and Kira Gantois. So those movements are having an impact and are having a change of the political debates when you take the international negotiations, but also at the European Parliament. And the very fact that they emerged in Belgium also really gives a way to this green trend that we were talking about. Do you think there's a reason why Youth for Climate first started in Belgium, or why the mobilization was so strong there?
I don't know if you have ideas about that. I'm interested. I don't know why it emerged in Belgium, but I'm quite proud that young women took the lead of these actions, and proud, and we have to mobilize to back them, because when I hear the critics that someone like Greta Thunberg has today, because she wants to raise awareness, and that she wants to also break the codes. She has a discourse and an audience that impacts the old world, and we see the reactions of also old men against her. I'm shocked about this, and this is not only a fact about fight concerning climate change, but finally it's also a fight of an old conception of the world where young people don't have their place when or their voice cannot be expressed. And I think we are entering a new era of people that say stop to these policies, and it's another way to act, mobilizing in the streets. And I think it's really important to back these movements and to support them, because the civil society and youth mobilization can impact. Not enough. Again, it doesn't impact enough, because it's not because Greta Thunberg and others were welcomed in the European Parliament that all the MEPs changed their point of view. They got a selfie with her, they were happy, but finally the decisions stay the same. But still, they, how do you say, elles bousculent, they disturb the way of working and the way of thinking of more traditional politicians, I would say. So I'm positive. I'm positive about all this. Yesterday we had the hearing of Didier Reynders, that you might know. And I found it so cynical, because he started his speech by reference to the young people mobilized for climate. When you know that the Belgium didn't get a green light for its climate change plan, action plan, it's quite cynical to do that. But still, we see that the influence is there, and that the mobilization needs to continue, like on Mercosur, on climate change as well, because it's with this mobilization that we can also politically continue to push all these priorities. And we see step by step that it makes a difference, and that the other groups are more and more sensitive to it. Because when we had discussions in the first meetings of my committees, in INTA, or International Trade Committees, almost all the groups had questions on the Amazon fires, on the issue of human rights in Brazil. So it's changing. I don't say policies are changing, but minds are changing, and I think it's really important to pursue our work.
And if you look at the youth really mobilizing in politics, it's not just in the forms of activism, but it's also at the European Parliament itself. If you look at the numbers of MEPs under 40, or if you look at the other side of the Atlantic with figures like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that's really try to change way of doing politics. Is it inspiring to you, and is it something that you want to encourage?
Yes, because here I arrive in an institution where the codes are there, and you're supposed to work in the way we tell you to work. And sometimes I realize I don't agree with this way of working, but I think I'm not the only one, so we're several to have a new way of thinking, of working that we can bring into this institution, but we will not push a revolution inside the European Parliament. Of course, it's still, well, we have to work inside the frame, but we can change it, and I feel it also really strongly with the media, because now I feel they're more and more attentive to have a gender-balanced panel, although it's not always the case. Also to have younger MEPs invited, and not only the ones we're used to see. So things are changing slowly, and I think as young MEPs, we have to push this also to break the rules and not especially take back what our predecessors did.
So try to change the way of practicing and doing things. We still have 15 minutes for questions. I see we already have one strong and motivated person.
Yeah.
That they do believe in science, but what is their arguments against that? Why they don't want to fight it? Why? It's not that I don't know, but I want to know if you talk to them and what did they tell you?
Unfortunately, I don't understand neither, because the facts are there. Science is there to show it. We have strong reports, and not only from the Greens. I mean, strong scientific reports at the GIEC level, and we live it. I mean, the weather is changing. There are more and more strong. Tempête, help me. Storms. Storms or very warm summers with all the consequences on health and so on. So the facts are there, and still some people believe we can just pursue business as usual and don't change the way we behave as individuals, and we need to take stronger measures at the political level.
Could it be because they just want to keep their privilege?
Their privilege, they also represent other sectors, industrial sectors. Yes. They're lobbied,
and the privilege
and they defend other priorities than ours. For us, the main priority is the health of people, health of our planet. For others, it's the health of our economy and of the industry. And so look at the interview, I don't know if you saw it, but Jacques Craé, who's the president of the l'Union Wallonne des Entreprises, he was interviewed this week, and he said the economy is not the solution to our problems, actually. It's a very strong resume that I'm making, but he broke the rules in his sector, and now he's really criticized by his sector. So we see that things are moving slowly, that a lot of economic sectors, a lot of entrepreneurs take the lead also to enter in new models of circular economy, reuse, and so on. And for the moment, it's at a too small scale, and what our job is at the political level is to alleviate this and to make it the main way, the main economical model, and to reduce at the counterpart all the industry that is polluting, and also change the way we're farming, for instance, and help agriculture sector to convert to new practices, to healthy practices and all what concerns local food and organic food, and that is what we want at a political level. But of course, a lot of other politicians don't want this and have been elected. So they've been elected by people that don't believe that we need to change the way we work and our economical model.
I have
Unfortunately.
one last question. Can I? And do you believe in green capitalism, capitalisme vert? Do you believe in it? Just you?
No, I think capitalism is at the source of the problem and of the neoliberal system that we are in, and that is based on growth. And growth needs resources, but the resources are limited. So it's just not possible to grow indefinitely. And this model also has made us dependent from countries like China or Russia on an energetic level, and resource level, with all the consequences that this implies. Today, countries, the European Union, doesn't take strong stand about what is going on in Hong Kong, for example, because there are economic relations with China that we need to maintain. We need to be careful about and very diplomatic with China, also for an economic reason and all the trade that we're doing with China. But I question our priorities. What is a priority in this? For me, human beings, the freedom and democracy seems to me more important than economic growth. And no, I'm not for green capitalism because it won't bring solutions to the main problem, that is the limit of our planet and of our resources. So we really need to change this model.
Hello. My question is basically, you touched upon a lot of topics, but you haven't really talked about the social dimension of sustainability and climate change. I'm very interested in that because I know that one of the main critiques of the Greens is that sustainability is the focus, but there are a lot of people left behind. We have rising inequalities, we have rising energy prices. Many people in rural areas might need their car, they might suffer the most from all the changes that our economy will face. So what would you tell those people, like how?
You're absolutely right, and I didn't raise it because for me, fighting climate change, having a strong green policy is fundamentally social. Going to more public transport is good for everybody. Going to isolated houses to lower our energy costs is good for everybody. And so, for instance, we need strong political support at the European level. So the European funds should be oriented to the energetic transition to help also with public money, public funds, the isolation of buildings and private houses, for instance. So putting in place a real transition policy implies also a social dimension. Going to a more sustainable economic system also implies, in our point of view, jobs with a good loan, more equilibrated repartition of the means, a more fiscal justice, also to use the money for social policies. So it's a global discourse, of course, that I'm having here, but a real transition would imply also a more equilibrated system for everybody, and not only having, for example, exemption of tax for multinationals and very high taxation on independent workers and small businesses. Today, the system is absolutely not equilibrated. Maybe it will change because the commissioner to economy that was in hearing this morning said that he could work with with another commissioner on the taxation of GAFA, so the big multinational of the digital sector, which would already be something that would be interesting because for the moment they almost pay no taxes. So even a small tax on those GAFAMs could bring money to the European Union to work on other issues. One thing is that now the discussions are going on the budget of the European Union and the multi-financial framework, and also the money we put in the different cohesion funds, social funds, fund for youth, and so on, and all the budgets are getting tighter, so where they should be at least doubled or 3 times more important than today, also in the social sector. So that's one of the fights we're leading now for the moment. It's the same for culture, and you might know that the culture disappeared from the title of the portfolio of the commissioner, which is a problem for us because it translates the view that the future commission has on those matters, culture, but also the social questions. Future commission on employment and social affairs is called jobs commissioner. Where are the social affairs? I mean, it's a way of presenting things that is already problematic.
And do you think the parliament can have a say on those titles?
It's part of the remarks we communicated during the hearings, and at the end of the hearing, the Commission of the European Parliament concerned writes a letter to the future commissioner saying, okay, we heard you, we agree or we disagree, and we want you to have special priorities and focus on this, and for example, European way of life, democracy and demography, the question of reintroducing culture in the title of all those questions have been put on the commissioner table.
Do we have another question? Yes.
Hi, my name is Laurent. I'm from Belgium.
Hello.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
You were mentioning something that I personally found a bit different from the stand of green parties, which is that green capitalism cannot work. It's not something you hear that often, in my opinion, from green parties, and definitely not from the lines of the parties. So is this more of a personal stand, or is this really a party stand for Ecolo in Belgium? Just recently, Thomas Piketty wrote his new book about capitalism et idéologie, which I would really invite you to look at, talking about participative socialism as the way out of capitalism. So how do you define this, how should I say, change of system that you were briefly mentioning? And maybe as a side question is, what do you see as the most challenging as an MEP? Like in terms of time constraint, in terms of how is it changing your life, you could say, in a sense? I would be interested to...
It's changing all my life.
I am sure it does. Thank you.
Is it a personal stand? No. I think Ecolo doesn't define itself as being anti-capitalist, anti-growth, but it's a position saying that green growth or sustainable growth, it's not the way we see the future of our economical model. So I don't think it's not a personal point of view inside Ecolo, but you're right saying all the Greens all over Europe don't have the same point of view about this. The Germans might be more entitled to work on not on green capitalism, that it's too much, but they question green growth differently than we do. Scandinavians, for example, the northern Greens are also more entitled to work on free trade and to influence the free trade agreements instead of reforming international trade. And we're more standing for a fundamental reform of our free trade agreements. For us, for me, it makes no sense to import massively chicken from all over the world when we can grow chicken inside our countries, even in our gardens. And the other countries also grow their own chickens they need to feed their citizens. That's the way I want to change also the model, the economical model. I think we have to go back to local economies. It doesn't mean to stop international trade. It doesn't mean to end our international relations, of course. It's not. It's neither about protectionism. I think it's coming back to a model, a more, how do you say that, un modèle plus sain, sane, healthy model. There are some products like coffee, cacao, bananas that will probably never grow here in Europe and that we'll still import, but other products that we can relocalize. And so our agriculture also needs to go along with a strong food policy, because the first purpose of agriculture is to feed the people locally. But then it also implies stronger policies through development policies with southern countries, because we forced them to adapt and to follow our own economical model. So we also need to help them to go back to a more sustainable model in their countries, I think, because we pushed to cultures that, like palm oil and others, we also push through our trade agreements to deforestation, and all this needs to change and to go back to a more sustainable model and local economy. And then what it changes for me to be a MEP, rhythm has changed, because I said it, I want to stay in touch and in contact with the civil society, with the activities I've always done in my region, and I'm a MEP for whole Wallonia and Brussels. So I want to stay connected and to go to different meetings like this one. And on Tuesday I was in Charleroi for a meeting on le bienveillir, so for the International Day of Older People. So it changes quite everything to my life, because when I was working in regional development, I had more, a classical schedule, and then I did what I wanted. And now I have the meetings inside the European Parliament of my committees and all the negotiations around the files I follow. So I need to be there if I want to do my job correctly. I need to go there. and if I want to be in touch with civil society, and not only the Belgian one, because I have a lot of appointments of demands of delegations from other countries and that are active at the European level. So yeah, a lot of work, but it's exciting, it's interesting. The main problem I have today is to try to find balance with my private life and my kids.
I think we have time for one last short question. Yes.
Hi. I wanted to thank you for mentioning culture and, like, regarding today hearings, the fact that culture is missing from the Mariah Gabriel title. I also wanted to thank you because you talked about green policies and, of course, like a green future for Europe. And I think I wanted to ask you, what do you think that could be the role of culture in designing a more sustainable future? And also Culture Action Europe, from the organization I'm part of, as a petition to bring back culture into the title of the commissioner. So I wanted to ask you, will you want to sign this petition? Everyone also who feels like it, you can just sign it on our website. And lastly, this is more a personal question about the hearings of Skinas this afternoon. I wanted to ask you, what do you think, because you're from the Libe, so what do you think about putting culture aside, like with other topics like security, so a certain approach to migration? And yes, if your committee will have some comments on this during the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, culture is very important to me. And what is shocking me is that during the electoral campaign, everybody was agreeing on the fact that culture needs to be central with education, also to fight populism and extreme right parties. And now, what is going on is that culture is put aside, and everywhere, not only at the European level. I mean, in member countries, the budget for culture is quite tight. Although we need to put culture in the schools, we need to have culture everywhere, and I think it's a main part of the diversity also of our societies, to have a strong cultural sector and a strong cultural sector supported, politically supported. And it's not the case today. And the fact that the name, namely culture, disappears from the title is problematic to me in that sense. So I'm really happy to sign your petition, and that's we also asking tonight. The hearing is going on Chinas, is going on, but when it comes to culture, we asked to put again culture in the official title of the commissioner. So it's very important and central to me and to others. I think I'm not the only one. As Green, the Greens are not the only ones saying it, but still c'est un des parents pauvres of the European policy. It's not new and it's not getting better. And I fear that in 5 years, people will maybe regret this, because I fear that in 5 years the populists and extreme right parties will be even stronger. And then the other question was about Skinas, the European way of life. If anybody can define this, it would help, because the kind of definition that von der Leyen gave us didn't really convince us. And yes, Skinas, so the commissioner also in charge of migration, in his written answers, so we addressed written questions prior to the hearings, also didn't convince us. He was very evasive in his answers and really avoided to link European way of life and migration. although it's the main problem is there. It's a conception of protecting our way of life is also for them contradictory to an open and a solidarity approach when it comes to migration. So they oppose again our way of life to migrants that come to challenge our way of life. Also security matters. He has a very strange way of defining security of citizens, because he opposes actually security and civil liberties, which is highly problematic, because in name of security we will constrain civil liberties. And that's not, again, the way we see our world. So yeah, I'm not sure it will go through. I'm not sure he will have his majority tonight to pass the first hearing. We'll see. And I really hope that this title will change, although the approach is there. And it's also the approach of the President of the European Commission. So again, we as MEPs, but also civil society, needs to be mobilized to say we don't agree with this conception of the European Union, and that's not our fundamental values. And I think they're too entitled to hear extreme right parties and populist parties when they defined or try to define a European way of life. I think at the contrary, we should have a strong openness message and solidarity message opposing extreme right and populist parties.
Maybe we should include promoting culture in what is protecting your European way of life. That could be one of the paths we could take. But well, thank you very much, Saskia, for this very interesting conversation. If you still have questions, you can ask them to Saskia after the panel. We now have to end this discussion because we have the next panel coming up in 15 minutes, 10 minutes with Bernard Stiegler, the philosopher. So please stay for this one. I think it'll be interesting. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you for being here. Thank you.